Okay, so let's just dive right in. When you look at the New York City skyline, you're not just seeing a bunch of buildings, are you? You're actually reading a story. It's this spectacular vertical history book written in steel, glass, and stone, and it tells you everything about ambition, disaster, and constant reinvention. Yeah, this quote just nails it. Every single layer of this city, from the cobblestones all the way up to the spires, is a chapter in the story of American ambition, technological innovation, and cultural evolution. So keep those three ideas in mind: ambition, innovation, and culture, because we're going to see them pop up again and again. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start from the ground up, literally. Then we'll get into the incredible race to the sky. From there, we'll explore a century of changing styles, zoom right into some unique neighborhoods, and finally, we'll see how old buildings are getting brand new stories today. Now, before New York could even think about reaching for the clouds, it had to build its foundations. The story of the skyscraper is absolutely amazing, but you gotta remember, it stands on centuries of architectural history that first spread across the island, not up from it. This slide is kind of like looking at the city's architectural DNA. We start with these simple Dutch colonial structures. Think practical, steep roofs, like the Wyckoff House, which is the oldest building in the entire city. Then that evolves into the really elegant, symmetrical federal style you can still find in places like Greenwich Village. Then comes the grand, almost democratic feel of Greek Revival with all its classic columns. And then, boom, the Victorian era hits, and suddenly there's just an explosion of ornate decorative styles that completely change the face of the city's neighborhoods. But then, everything changed. It was like a perfect storm of ambition, new technology, and maybe just a little bit of ego, all came together at once. The city stopped growing out, and it started growing up. This is where New York's most famous contribution to world architecture really begins: the race to the sky. And you have to understand, this whole race could not have happened without one brilliant invention: the safety elevator. Before Elisha Otis, nobody was willing to live or work a dozen stories up. Who would climb all those stairs? But his safety brake, that little device, made tall buildings practical for the first time. And with that one invention, the sky was, quite literally, the limit. And once the technology was there, oh man, the race was on. In 1902, the Flatiron Building showed everybody what a steel frame could really do. Just a little over a decade later, the Woolworth Building was so grand it was nicknamed the Cathedral of Commerce. But the pace was just getting crazier. In 1930, the stunning Chrysler Building briefly takes the crown, only to be beaten less than a year later by the undisputed king, the Empire State Building. Just stop and think about that number for a second. The Empire State Building held the title of the world's tallest building for nearly 40 years. In a city that's famous for tearing down and rebuilding itself in the blink of an eye, that is an almost unimaginable reign. It wasn't just a building, it was this permanent fixture in the sky. But, the race to the sky wasn't just about height. It was also about style. As the 20th century moved on, the whole idea of what a building should even look like changed dramatically. And that gave us a skyline with multiple, really distinct personalities. The 1920s and 30s were the city's Art Deco golden age. You can just feel the optimism and the energy in these designs. The Chrysler Building is the poster child, of course, but look at Rockefeller Center. That's not just one building. It's an entire urban vision, seamlessly blending art and commerce. This style was everywhere, and it really defined the look of modern New York. After the war, though, a new, much stricter philosophy took over: modernism. It was a total rejection of all that pre-war decoration. The mantra became less is more: sleek, unadorned glass and steel boxes where function was everything. But by the 70s, a new generation of architects started to rebel against that, which led to postmodernism. And their response: less is a bore. They brought back ornamentation, historical references, and a real sense of playfulness. And here are the two perfect examples of that clash of ideas. On one side, you have the Seagram Building. It's the peak of modernism. It's elegant, it's minimal, it's very serious. It set the standard for corporate towers for decades. And on the other side, you have the AT&T Building, which shocked the entire world by sticking what basically looks like a giant piece of antique furniture on its roof. It was a huge, bold statement that decoration and history were back. Okay, now let's zoom in from that towering skyline right down to the streets. Because New York isn't just one monolithic city, it's really a collection of villages, and each one has its own distinct architectural character that's been shaped by its unique history. So let's start with one of the most famous, Greenwich Village. Seriously, walking through its streets feels like stepping back in time, into a version of New York that existed way before the relentless grid system and the skyscrapers took over. So what makes it feel so different? Well, first off, its streets. They follow this chaotic, organic tangle that existed long before that rigid grid was stamped on the rest of Manhattan. And because it was preserved, it's like a living museum of 19th century architecture, with these beautiful Federal, Greek Revival, and Victorian homes all packed together.
Now, for another key innovation, this time from the 19th century, cast iron architecture. I want you to think of it like architectural Legos. Builders could mass produce these strong, ornate iron pieces in a factory and then just assemble them on site. The huge benefit was that these iron frames could support enormous panes of glass, flooding the buildings with natural light.
And the best place in the entire world to see this is in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. It's an entire neighborhood built with this revolutionary technology. These buildings, with their massive windows, were originally factories and warehouses. They were perfect for lighting up workspaces before electricity was common. But as that industry moved out, artists started moving in, drawn to these huge, open, light-filled spaces. And that's a classic New York story. A neighborhood's architecture, built for one purpose, gets completely reinvented for another. And that brings us to our final section. The story of New York's architecture today is this fascinating balancing act between building the future and honoring the past. It's a story of preservation and constant reinvention. And you can see this dynamic playing out everywhere. There's healing and rebuilding, with the New World Trade Center complex rising as a powerful symbol of resilience. There's preservation, with movements that saved places like Grand Central Terminal now, protecting thousands of historic buildings. There's brilliant adaptive reuse, like turning the abandoned High Line Railway into one of the world's most celebrated parks. And all the while, superstar architects are adding bold, sometimes controversial, new shapes to the skyline. It's just a constant conversation between the past and the future. And that's the thing to remember. The story is never finished. The skyline is a living document, constantly being edited and added to. From those Dutch foundations to the super tall towers of today, it has always reflected the dreams and the challenges of its time. Which leaves us with one final thought. As this skyline keeps changing, what story is it going to tell next?